Isn't that great? That's what he said. The light, here's Jesus talking to Nicodemus. The light is shining into the darkness. And the darkness is, how can these things be? Can a man crawl back up inside his mother and be born? What are you talking about? You couldn't ask for a more light, dark conversation taking place at the same time in the same place between two people. And Jesus is beautiful about it. You've got to love this conversation with Nicodemus. Because he could have hammered Nick. He really could have hammered him. Nick came to him professing to be like one of the leaders in Israel, one of the head teachers. I know what I'm talking about. And Jesus could have said, you're as blind as a bat. Are you serious? Come on, Nick. This is spiritual 101. You must be born anew if you're going to see. John the Baptist, there was a man I've seen. He's the Son of God. That's all I need to see, quite frankly. Well, John, what about regeneration and sanctification and whatever? You guys can do that up at Pharisee school. All I know is I've seen. He is the Son of God. I'm with him. He's the one that is going to make me born. He's going to baptize me with the Spirit. I've been doing water. He's going to turn water to wine, and he's going to baptize us with the Spirit. There's a whole different ballgame we're entering into now. John the Baptist got that. He saw it. He testified. Go his way. He's the baptizer of the Spirit. All things will be made new through him. This is what he's doing. The man of darkness comes, not demonic. He's just in spiritual darkness. In spiritual darkness, you see the signs. It means nothing other than, well, there's something of God about you. And so Jesus says to him, you're going to stay there forever unless you're born from above, and then you'll be able to see the kingdom of God is around you. And quite frankly, has been. But you've never seen it because you're walking in darkness. He's not calling him a bad guy. It's just where he's walking. He's stuck at the level of blood and water. If you're still in John 1, would you read verse 12?
But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe in his name.
Was that 12?
Yeah, not 13 too?
I think I might want 14.
Oh. And the word became flesh. Oh.
No, where's the thing we talk about being born of the will, not being born of the will?
Yeah, that's 13. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God.
They were born, but not of any of those things. Not the will of man and not of blood or anything like that. They weren't born of that. They were born of God. They were born of God. This is a message John's going to carry with him through his entire gospel. But Nick is stuck on blood and water, which makes it fascinating to me. On the cross when they stick him in the side in John 19, what comes out? Blood and water. A sign of birth. That now the birth takes place. That's what you had when you birthed two children, blood and water all over the place. It was a sign of birth. If you mention blood and water, somebody's giving birth to something. They stick them in the side, and the new birth is taking place on all of us. It's a sign of the new birth. And Nicodemus is one of the guys that ends up burying Jesus. And I'm fascinated by this stuff, that Nicodemus would have been one of the guys that's looking and saying, wait a minute, blood and water doesn't come out though. What's going on here? He can't help, I don't believe Nicodemus can help but refer back to his initial conversation back in the 3rd chapter about blood and water. And Jesus engaging him in this conversation of being born in the natural, being born in the spiritual. Two different births, if you would. Paul talks about the cross. We're going to get into it at some point in 1 Corinthians, the 1st and 2nd chapter, when he talks about the message of the cross being foolishness. Paul talks about that. Even this conversation here, the only reason why we can even gravitate towards what Jesus is saying and come to grips with some of the things that he's saying is because, like Paul says, the message is foolishness. It's spiritually discerned. It's spiritually discerned. It's not going to make sense. I don't get it. Of course you don't, unless you're spiritually discerning it. And then it's like, I still don't get it, but I got it. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit like, I still don't get it, but I got it. That's the kind of thing that Peter said about Paul, didn't he? You know, we don't know what he's talking about, but he's been with God. We know he got it from God. It's a bit like that. And I feel poor Nicodemus is standing there. You know, he has come to Jesus in his spiritual darkness. And he's faced with the light, and the light is speaking into the darkness, but the darkness is just not getting it. Just can't comprehend it. Moving on to verses 5 through 9 in chapter 3.
Jesus answered, "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Do not marvel that I said to you, you must be born again. The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear the sound of it, but do not know where it comes from and where it is going. So is everyone who is born of the Spirit." Nicodemus answered and said to him, "How can these things be?"
It's the second time Nicodemus is like, how can these things be? I don't get it. How does this work? I don't get it. And that's because he's trying to get it in the natural. He's trying to get it in the darkness. Jesus, you know, in the first chapter, Jesus uses like Jacob's ladder as a type of typology. You know, you'll see the angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. And this to me is such a beautiful picture of Jesus almost like descending, coming down the ladder, if you would, to take Nicodemus's hand, to walk him up to a spiritual place, into the light. Because he knows in the dark he's never going to get it. But he can walk him to the light. And you see, this to me is just so lovingly. It's such a different position than we walk in a lot of times, where we batter somebody for their lack of spiritual insight. And Jesus is just like, no, I'm going to love them from the place of darkness into spiritual. I am not going to put them down. I'm not going to lecture at them. I'm not going to do any of that. What I'm going to do is descend, come to man. There was a man. I'm going to come to man, and I'm going to take his hand, and I am going to walk him to the place of spiritual understanding. Walk him to the place of being born from above. Actually, I'm going to go to a cross and birth him. I'm going to birth him.
Is there any way he could have understood that, Steve?
Nicodemus?
Yeah. Without Jesus
I
enlightening him?
would say no.
And Jesus was pretty
Yeah.
clear. He says you got to be born of the Spirit. I mean, it doesn't get any more
But
plain than that.
But they've never heard that before until this conversation.
They would have thought that what they weren't quite getting, I think anyway, I'm putting words and thoughts out of what I think. They had the prophecies. They had Jeremiah, Ezekiel about new hearts, about God putting his Spirit in. They had it. They just were, I believe, they were so Messiah fixated, not about receiving the Spirit, not recognizing that one of them, and it's still a problem in the church, one of the major things, if not the most major thing that Jesus did, while we're focused on salvation, he's imparting Spirit. And this is what he's talking about through his ministry. He's talking about imparting Spirit. And the only way he'll be able to impart the Spirit is by going to the cross. That's got to be dealt with. And then he can impart the Spirit. Do you remember what he says? Wait for the promise. Wait for the promise. He doesn't, you're all saved, we can get on with this. No. He says, now, I'm going to receive the Spirit. It's all about the Spirit. I want to give you the Spirit. They weren't getting this. And what you're asking about, but they really couldn't get it. Because it's spiritually discerned. It's spiritually discerned. But Jesus is giving Nicodemus the opportunity to come to a place of saying, all he had to say at any point was, I don't understand, but I believe. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the biggest problems we got. John the Baptist says, I've seen. He's the Son of God. What are you talking about, John? I don't know. But I know he's it.
But Nicodemus
And I know
got
this
that,
much.
right?
It can't be discerned without the Spirit. Remember, John the Baptist was filled with the Spirit from the time he was born. What did you just say?
He gets there though, right?
Nick?
Nicodemus?
Yes, he does.
It takes him a bit.
And it's interesting to see his journey. I love his journey. He's not mentioned a lot. He's not mentioned anywhere except in John's Gospel. But he's mentioned enough in John's Gospel where we look at it and we see how he made the journey from scratching his head, but he came to Jesus. Scratching his head. I really don't get this. And it's okay, Nick. You will. He took on board what Jesus says in this conversation. He took it on board. We can tell by the next time he appears, which is right at the end of Jesus' ministry, when the Pharisees are intent on destroying Jesus. And Nicodemus is looking at it and saying, but wait a minute. Does our law give us the right to judge somebody before we even listen to them or know what they're talking about? That was not a Pharisee's position. In fact, they look at him and say, are you from Galilee too? Are you on his side? And that paves the way for what this conversation is about. And ultimately, Nicodemus is one of the two guys, him and Joseph of Arimathea, who pour out spices and bring him to a tomb and the whole thing.
Oh, Nicodemus is one?
Yeah. Jesus tells him, look, do not marvel at what I'm saying. I don't want to get into a big thing about that, but I just want to leave you with this. When Jesus says do not marvel, and several times in the scriptures that statement is used, don't be astonished, do not marvel kind of thing. Because when you marvel, when you're just astonished at something, there's no spiritual receptivity. What there is kind of like this amazement that we're trying to get our head around, and we're not supposed to get our head around it. We're supposed to we can never gain spiritual understanding by being amazed at something. I'm so amazed. All you're saying is that your head doesn't get it. And then from there, we work at trying to get it. And we're still not like getting it, and we get confused and a variety of things. So Jesus is saying to him, don't be amazed. Don't marvel at what I'm saying. Receive. Somebody read from John 1, to as many as receive. Just receive it. Just receive it. I mean, I don't know if knowing the molecular structure of beef helps you enjoy a steak better. Just eat it. How's it taste? Tastes great. Tastes, if you're a meat eater, tastes great. Do you know the molecular structure? Do you know how long it was cooked? Do you know how much fat is it? I don't really care. It tastes great. So often the things that are the most meaningful to us we don't get, but we receive. My son, our son, sent us, it's posted on YouTube. YouTube? Yeah, I think it's YouTube. Of this kid. How old is that kid, would you say? 8, 9, 10, someplace in that area. And he obviously has perfect pitch. He has beyond perfect pitch as far as I'm concerned. This kid is miraculous in the sense that, I don't know if it's his dad or a teacher or something, is playing all these tones of piano. As quickly as this guy is playing them and saying, and they're all dissonant chords and stuff. Combinations of notes that are very dissonant, that you can hardly understand even if you were a jazz musician. And he's asking this kid to tell him what the notes are he's playing. And he sings them. Every single note. As quickly as the guy plays them, he sings them. And he goes through all these different chords. Every so often he'll stop and say, sing an A flat, A flat, and then he'd go on, sing an F, F. It was just, it's the most amazing thing. It's only a couple minutes, this video. It's beyond, to me, description. So I wrote, how you can on Facebook, you can write a little post, and I just put underneath there, I said, well, I'm beyond amazed and I'm beyond impressed and amazed. I guess it's about time that we learn. I guess it's about time that we go beyond understanding to learning. Is the way I left it with him. point I'm trying to make here is Jesus is trying to, he brings in another type, the wind, that has been totally taken out of context by a lot of windy Christians. About, oh well, I'm just following the Spirit, and they're dancing on flowers and acting like a weirdo. And it's nothing like that. That is not what walking in the Spirit or being a spiritual person is about based on this past. This is a perfect word that says people who are born of the Spirit basically have given up their own will and wants to the will and the wants of the Spirit. They're people of the Spirit. The wind blows where it wills. We've given over our wills to the will of the Spirit, where the Spirit says. And it's not a freaky, weird thing. Anyway, moving on, we've got to finish up. Verses 10 through 13.
Jesus answered and said to him, "Are you the teacher of Israel, and do not know these things? Most assuredly I say to you, we speak what we know and testify what we have seen, and you do not receive our witness. If I told you earthly things, and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you heavenly things? No one has ascended to heaven but he who has come down from heaven, that is, the Son of Man who is in heaven."
Do you know, and that's, again, that latter reference that John used in his first chapter about ascending and descending from heaven. And basically, I have descended, I ascend, and I descend. I've come down to reach you. I ascend, I receive from my Father. I come down, I descend. Nobody else has done that. The Son of Man can do that. The Son of Man does that. Now, I don't want you to think in terms of physical places ascending and descending, because he's talking about the same kind of spiritual encounters we have. That we have the sense of the Spirit in us. And at times, I'm sure all of us in prayer and worship, whatever, we actually feel like we're ascending someplace. To a different place, a different dimension, whatever you want to call it. There's like an ascension that takes place and we come back with more than we left with. And it's to share with others. I descend in order to give to others.